Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, Chinese and Russian nuclear-capable bombers spotted patrolling near Alaska.
It's the first time that we've seen these two countries fly together like that.
President Biden gives his fourth Oval Office address and explains why he's stepping aside from the 2024 race. A look at his administration's China policy. The Justice Department charges a China-born Florida man with spying on Chinese dissidents in the U.S. Authorities say he's been providing information about them to China's intelligence agency for over a decade. And a deep dive into the world of illicit fentanyl and what it takes to produce the deadly synthetic opioids from scratch. The substance could be a lot more accessible than many think. China and Russia patrolling near American territory. The U.S. and Canada intercepted 4 Chinese and Russian bombers near Alaska Wednesday. These bombers are nuclear capable. The U.S. Defense Chief said it's not a surprise.
It's the first time that we've seen these two countries fly together like that. They didn't enter our airspace. I think the closest point of approach was about 200 miles off of our coast.
The Chinese and Russian bombers were in a joint patrol in the airspace of the Chukchi and Bering Seas, waters near Alaska. They were intercepted in Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone. The zone serves as a buffer between international airspace and a country's sovereign airspace. It gives the country time to identify and respond to what type of foreign aircraft is coming near. China regularly flies jets into Taiwan's air identification zone. It's one of the regime's gray zone warfare tactics against the island, designed to intimidate and exert pressure on it. The U.S. military said these jets remained in international airspace and did not enter American or Canadian airspace, adding that this activity is not seen as a threat, but the U.S. would continue monitoring the situation. Over on Capitol Hill, lawmakers gave their reactions.
They don't belong in our airspace. I will certainly watch and see what happens with it.
They're testing us. They're making a statement.
China said the joint patrol has nothing to do with the current international situation. Russia said it's a new area of joint operations. Just 2 weeks ago, 4 Chinese warships inched closer to U.S. waters in Alaska. The Chinese ships were in international waters, but still inside the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. The zone spans 200 nautical miles from the U.S. shoreline. The Chinese ships told the U.S. Coast Guard via radio that they were conducting freedom of navigation operations. The U.S. Coast Guard ship monitored the Chinese ships until they left. To talk more about the U.S. Air Defense Identification Zone violations by Chinese and Russian bombers, we tap Grant Newsham, retired Marine Colonel and author of When China Attacks, for insight. Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Well, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, NORAD has intercepted 2 Russian and 2 Chinese bombers flying near Alaska. Now, they didn't enter either U.S. or Canadian sovereign airspace and were deemed, quote, not seen as a threat. But what do you make of the messaging here?
Well, the messaging is that the Chinese and the Russians are going to cooperate to make life miserable for us. This is the first time they've done this together. Both of these aircraft can carry nuclear weapons, so they're pretty much sending out really the first leg of what is called the nuclear triad, and that refers to ways you can deliver nuclear weapons. This is not good, and as I say, they smell weakness on the part of the United States. Otherwise, they wouldn't have tried this. They just don't feel as if there's going to be any serious response in any direction, from any direction, for them.
Now, on that note, this type of ADIZ violation has become somewhat of Beijing's gray zone tactic when it comes to Taiwan, putting pressure on the island there. Is this the same strategy we're seeing here against the U.S. now?
You know, it's similar. I think you'd have to call it about the same thing, just with Taiwan. They're able to do a whole lot more of it and come in very, very close to Taiwan. With us, they're still a ways off our territory, but it's really Think of it as, say, an aggressor, a bully, some guy who wants to scare you, and he sort of comes running towards you, and he may have weapons, may not, and he just wants to see how you respond, and then he backs off and says, haha, I was just joking. But you do see around Taiwan, they see this many times a day, every day, and it's much worse for them. Now, how do you respond to that? And this just tightening the noose on the Taiwanese and seeing how much they can wear them down. And also, as importantly, seeing how the Americans, the Japanese, the free world, how do they respond to pressure on Taiwan?
Grant Newsham, thank you so much for your time.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
A poignant speech marking the start of the closing chapters of Biden's presidency. President Biden addressed the nation Wednesday night, calling his decision to exit the 2024 race a matter of defending democracy. He mentioned China once in his remarks.
You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore.
So what are the key takeaways from Biden's China policy? A brief summary here. President Biden largely kept Trump's China policy in place. On trade, he maintained Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods. The move was put in place to pressure China into buying more U.S. goods. Biden said he would quadruple tariffs on Chinese electric cars to 100% and double tariffs on semiconductors to 50%. The Biden administration also said it would slap tariffs on Mexican steel and aluminum partially made in China so that Chinese steel would not be able to enter the U.S. market duty-free by passing through Mexico first. Another key part of Biden's China policy is semiconductors. Biden made it harder for China to get hold of artificial intelligence chips made in the U.S., chips that can boost Beijing's military power. He also signed a law which offers $50 billion in subsidies to boost domestic chip manufacturing. In the face of Beijing's rising aggression in the Indo-Pacific, the Biden administration continued approving arms sales to Taiwan. It also upgraded relations with Japan and signed a pact that would arm Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. A Florida man has been charged with spying for Beijing. Authorities say for more than a decade, he spied on Falun Gong and other dissidents in the U.S. NTD's Jack Bradley has more.
The DOJ announced on Wednesday that it charged Ping Li with spying on Chinese dissidents and U.S. firms, all for the Chinese Communist Party, for over a decade. Li is a China-born U.S. citizen, resident of Florida, and for over 13 years he allegedly worked with China's intelligence agency, the Ministry of State Security. This includes providing information directly to the CCP about the telecommunications company he worked at, as well as information that could be used to harm U.S. citizens and their families back in China. Authorities say that his targets included pro-democracy activists, as well as U.S. politicians and nonprofits, and practitioners and supporters of the spiritual group Falun Gong. This is the latest in federal action against Beijing's attempts to suppress Falun Gong in the United States. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is heavily persecuted by the Chinese regime. In May 2023, the DOJ charged 2 suspected Chinese agents with attempting to bribe the IRS. They allegedly aimed to revoke the nonprofit status of an entity run by Falun Gong practitioners. We've reached out to Li's lawyers but haven't heard back so far, and if Li is convicted on these charges, he faces up to 15 years in prison. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Moving on to the world of illicit fentanyl, an investigative report by Reuters suggests the deadly synthetic opioid is a lot more accessible than people might think. Washington says most of the drug precursors come in from China and that making the pills from scratch is easily done with a basic knowledge of chemistry. Here's more.
America has a major health crisis caused by illicit fentanyl, the highly addictive narcotic.
We were seeing a lot of these.
It's commonly sold in the form of small blue pills and is sometimes laced into other drugs. A team of Reuters reporters spent months finding out just how easy it is to get hold of everything needed to begin making and selling these synthetic opioids.
We potentially had enough chemicals to make somewhere in the range of $3 million worth of street drugs.
What we discovered helps to explain why US authorities are struggling to get on top of the illicit trade.
In some areas of the country, like Philadelphia, you see fentanyl being present in nearly all opioid samples that we test.
It's the synthetic opioid that's killing tens of thousands of Americans a year. Fentanyl is the street drug behind the majority of the fatal overdoses recorded in the US last year.
More people in the United States between the ages of 18 to 49 die from fentanyl than from guns, car accidents, or any other cause, period. So today, with this new understanding, we're taking action to significantly reduce the flow of precursor chemicals and pill presses from China to the Western Hemisphere.
Now, the US, Mexico, and China are linked in a toxic triangle as the drug's biggest consumer, manufacturer, and raw materials supplier. The trade does not hinge solely on the final product, but also on the supply of chemicals known as precursors, which are the drug's essential ingredients. A Reuters team, including reporter Mo Taman, found that buying and turning these precursors into fentanyl requires only an internet connection, some virtual currency, and a basic grasp of chemistry. Our reporters spent $3,600 buying 12 precursors that were deemed authentic by professional labs, as well as the equipment needed to manufacture fentanyl.
Even at $1, the profit is massive for ultimately the cartels. If you think about it, we potentially had enough chemicals to make somewhere in the range of $3 million worth of street drugs.
The ease with which our reporters bought the drug-making chemicals exposed holes in the world's regulatory framework and law enforcement. Prowling the dark web wasn't necessary, as vendors and crude digital advertisements abound on the regular internet. Purchases were made using encrypted messaging services and mainly cryptocurrency. Reuters consulted Alex J. Krotolsky, a chemist who tests and studies illicit drugs at the non-profit Center for Forensic Science Research and Education near Philadelphia.
China, rather than making the final products, started making the precursors. Those precursors were being sent elsewhere. And then those precursors over time have also been scheduled. So there's been changes in to the synthesis pathway based on the regulation or controlling of those precursors.
Reuters also bought a pill press, 2 dye molds, and a blue-coloured binding agent. All that's required to produce small light blue tablets stamped with an M and 30, the signature markings of a generic version of the prescription painkiller oxycodone. Securing the remaining ingredients was not difficult. All those materials were purchased on America's most popular shopping site, Amazon.com. Amazon told us that aniline is a legal and widely available product, and so are all the other materials we bought there.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has embarked on a trip across 6 countries in Asia. Officials said its goal is to show the United States' commitment in the Indo-Pacific region. The trip will mark one of Blinken's longest foreign visits, as he is slated to stop in Laos, Vietnam, Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, and Mongolia. On the sidelines of a meeting in Laos, the Secretary of State is expected to meet with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The two will discuss China's military aid for Russia's war in Ukraine and the regime's aggressive maneuvers in the South China Sea. While in Tokyo, Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will meet with their counterparts to follow up on an agreement they made in April. At the time, the U.S. and Japan announced a string of initiatives to bolster their military ties. That's as concern looms over aggression from China and Russia. A Hong Kong court struck down Jimmy Lai's bid to end his trial on Thursday.
Jimmy Lai is a media mogul and one of the most prominent critics against Beijing in Hong Kong. He founded the now shuttered pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. Authorities accuse Lai of colluding with foreign forces and conspiracy to publish seditious materials. Lai pleaded not guilty to both charges. These charges came under the national security law. The West has voiced concerns that the law has eroded Hong Kong's freedom. Many pro-democracy activists have been arrested and news outlets closed after the law went into effect. Lai's trial would resume on November 20th. If convicted, he could face a life sentence. He's a British citizen, and both the U.S. and UK have called for Lai's immediate release.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Just click the link down below. Here's what to look out for in our second half. Typhoon Gaimi wreaking havoc as it barrels across Taiwan, with hundreds injured and a rising death toll since Wednesday. An Australian swimmer says he might protest against a Chinese rival accused of claiming a gold medal while doping. At the same time, the Olympic Committee places new restrictions on demonstrating during the Games.
I mean, I absolutely believe in clean sport, and I hope that this is a clean Games.
And why is China pulling the plug on nuclear arms control talks with Washington? Beijing is blaming U.S. weapons sales to Taiwan for the decision, but is that the whole story? More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.